Today we're going to build a simple scene manager so that our player can move from one level to another with a nice simple transition that you can use to build your own. Hi, my name is Michael, and welcome to my 2D action and adventure RPG tutorial series. We are learning how to build a top-down 2D game that features action, adventure, and RPG mechanics all in Godot 4 using GD Script. Alright, before we begin building our level manager, make sure you have some levels set up. So I've set up 3 levels here. You can see this level 1 kind of has an exit at the bottom and on the right. Level 2 has an exit or an entrance at the top, and 3 is on the left, so you can kind of see how those fit together. And these are the levels I'm going to use. You can make your own. Keep in mind that these levels also have a script attached. This level class that we created in my previous tutorial, if you're following along, and it has just a simple 2 lines of code in the ready function. We're going to add on to this script today, and each of your levels needs to have this script attached to it. And so once you've got that, I guess, then you're ready to move along with me. And the first thing we're going to create is we're going to create a new scene that we're going to use to detect when our player is exiting or entering the next level. And so I like to call this a level transition. You could call it whatever you want, but I'm just going to go in my levels folder. I'm going to create a new scene, and I'll just go ahead and call it level transition. Okay, let's change our level transition, our node type. Actually, let's change it to be an area 2D instead of a node 2D. There we go. And of course, an area 2D needs a collision shape. Now you could assign the collision shape as a child of this scene after you instantiate it. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and add the collision shape to this scene. And we're going to go ahead and alter this kind of in real time, and we're going to create a script that allows us to preview what that shape's going to look like before we test our game. So let's go ahead and set up this collision shape 2D that I've added and just give it a rectangle shape. I'm going to give it a kind of a purple color, something unique. Let's just zoom in on this guy here. We're going to change this size later, but right now we'll just make it a default of 32 by 32. That's kind of the size of a 1 tile on my map. And so you can make that size match if you need to or want to. Now, one other thing we need to do with our level transition is we want this area to be monitoring, looking for the player, but it's not monitorable, so we can turn that off. And then if we look at the collision here, we can turn off the layer that it's on, and we'll just leave on layer mask 1. That's our layer that our player's collider is assigned to. And that should be everything we need to do just to set up this basic scene. And of course, we're going to need a script because that's where all the magic's going to happen. So in our levels scripts folder, I'm going to create a new script here, and we'll call it level transition as well. Level_transition. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just drag that onto my root node there. And let's give it a class name of level transition. And this should extend area 2D. Now we're not going to need a process function here in this area. We're just going to need our ready to begin with. But actually, we're going to do something special with this. I want to set up this level transition. Let me go ahead and save this and just drop it into our level 1 scene here. So we've got one level transition here, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that and drag that over here. I want to be able to resize this with some parameters and properties in the inspector and have it update in the editor. So we're going to do that today, which is going to be something we haven't done in any of my tutorials before. And we'll use that with the special tool class type that Godot supports. And then we're going to add the parameters that we need so that, we can communicate with our scene manager what scene to move to and kind of what area to move to in that new scene. So let's go back to our level transition. On the very first line, go ahead and move the class name and the extends down. And at the very first line, put @tool. This tells Godot that you want this script to also run in the editor. Okay, and that can be a little bit tricky because obviously there's some code that we don't want to run in the editor, but there's other code that we do. And we'll kind of look at how to separate that code out today as we work on this. But just know that this at tool is going to be super useful for us, and it's what allows this scene to run its script in the editor. We're going to need several variables and other items to be able to make this thing work. So I'm just going to go ahead and set them all up now. First, we want an enum for the side, and we're just going to give it left, right, top, and bottom. This is just an easy way for us to track the side that this is pointing to without having to use a string, so we don't have to worry about spelling errors. And then we're going to need several exported variables that we can use. So we're going to use one called export_file. And what this does is it exports something. It'll put an item in the inspector that will allow us to choose a file in Godot within our project. We're going to call this the level, and within this export file, within the parentheses, we can actually provide a parameter here that's going to help us limit the types of files. So I'm going to put star as a wildcard and then .tscn. What this means is we're only going to want to open Godot scene files. That's what we're expecting to be put into this input in the inspector. And then we're also going to need another variable. We just simply say export var on this one. We'll call it the target transition area. And this is a string. This is just going to be used, oops, not in quotes, colon string. Now this value is going to be used to point the player. Let's look at our scene here. So when we walk into this, right, we've got level transition down here and level transition 2. And we just want to be able to provide the name of the transition that this connects to on one of our other maps. So like over here on map 2, let's go ahead and add a level transition at the top. This has a name, right, in the inspector of level transition, and that's what we're going to be passing in to this variable here. So actually by default, we can just call it level transition. And then unless you change the name or there's multiple, then that's what all your level transitions that you drag in are going to be called. It just might have like a 1 or a 2. But since we're putting this in the inspector, we can just update that as needed. And then let's use export category to give us a nice divider within our inspector. And we'll just call this collision area settings. So these are the settings that are going to control that purple box. And then we're going to export, I'm going to export 2 variables for now. So let's go export variable side, and this is going to be of our side enums, which is all caps. And by default, let's set it to side.left. Let's export one more variable. I'm going to call this one snap to grid. And this is going to be a Boolean. And it's just going to be false by default. We're going to want to do one last thing here. Let's go to our level transition scene. We want to get a reference to our collision shape, because when we change some of these variables, we're going to want to update this collision shape. So I'm just going to remove the underscore 2D from the end. So it's just called collision shape. And there we go. So you should have these various items set up in your script before we're ready to work in it. You know what? We left out an export variable up here. So we have our side, we have the snapped grid. We want another value here actually. And this is for the size. So let me just go export range, a range between 1 and 12, the default of 1. And we're going to add this or greater modifier on here. And what the or greater does is it allows us to actually go higher than 12. Just by default, our range will go through 1 through 12, but if the user types something higher, it'll keep that value. Okay, so this range is going to be a variable that we call size. And it's an integer, and by default, I'm going to set it to 2. Okay, there we go. So what we want to happen, let's go ahead and save this. Let's go to, well, let's just look at this. So here we've got our different values that we've set up in our level transition. We've got the level that's connected to, and you'll notice that because we said it was a file, we've got a little file thing we can click. And because of that filter, it's only showing scene files. You see that? So if we look through here, through our directory, we're only going to find those. So if we go into levels, we can see the 3 levels that we could potentially transition to, right? I'm not going to set one here within this because this is going to act as our base. We're only going to set that level from within the other levels. The target transition area is level transition. We've got a size of 2. It's on the left side. And then we'll do something with this snap to grid later. So actually, let's look at our other scenes. So what we want to happen, like in scene 1 here, if I pick this and I change the side to bottom and I change the size of this to 2 or 3 or 1 or whatever, we want this little box to update accordingly. Okay, so let's go back to our script. We're going to need a function in here that allows us to update it. So we'll just call it update area. And what this is going to do is we're going to create a new rectangle shape based on the settings that the user has put in. And we're going to update the, let's look at the level transition scene. We're going to update this collision shape with the new values, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the values based off of our default size. And you could set that as an export variable here if you wanted to change the size settings for this. In my case, for sake of simplicity, I'm just going to hard code it in because all of my levels are going to use that 32 pixel by 32 pixel tile shape. So here's what we're going to do. Within our update area, we're going to declare 2 new variables that we're going to use to help us calculate this. And we'll make a new rectangle called, well, we're not going to make a rectangle with this. We're going to use a vector 2 called new rect. And this is going to define kind of the size of the rectangle. So by default, that's 32 by 32. And then we're also going to define a position. And you'll see why we need this. And of course, our position is going to also be a vector 2. And by default, we'll just set that to vector 2.0. Man, I keep hitting slash instead of period. Okay, there we go. Let's go back to our scene 1 and let's look at this. So if we have a transition that's on the bottom and we change the size, then we want it to, I'm going to just scale this temporarily. We want it to grow on the x-axis like this, right? However, if it's like this rectangle over here, that's a left or right entrance, then we want it to scale this way, okay? We're also going to position it so that when we change the side that it's on, not only will it change how it scales, but it's going to change how it's positioned. So we'll do that in code, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So let's come in here to our code, and let's start by just detecting what the side is. So if the side that the user has selected is equal to side.top, right? Then we want to size a certain way. We'll just say the new rectangle, we're going to scale it on the x-axis. So we'll take the x and we'll multiply it by the size. So if the user selects 2, that's 2 grids wide. So it'll just be, that'll become 64 by 32. Okay. So we're going to multiply the x-axis by the size, and then we're going to set the position. Let's see, we'll just set the y position to, we'll just subtract 16 pixels from it on the y. So that's we're going to keep it centered, but it's going to bump it down so that the top edge of the box is on the center of the shape. So that'll make sense when we look at it. So now let's go ahead and set up what'll happen if this is on the bottom. And it's basically going to be the same. And so there's probably a slightly better way to write this code, but instead of subtracting 16 from the position, we'll add 16. Okay. Now let's go ahead and I'm going to just copy all of this, change this elif. So if it's on the left, then we want to, instead of multiplying the x, let's multiply the y by the size, and we'll set the x position to minus 16. And if it's on the right, then let's change this to multiplying the y and change this to the x. Okay, there we go. So this is going to set some of the values on our collision shape, or it's going to set up some of these values. So let's just do a check here if we have a collision shape. This is just for safety. Actually, you know what? This is actually really important, because when we make this, this is for safety, but it's also because we're running this as a tool. And there are times when we might not have the collision shape when this scene renders in the editor, and we might run into an issue. So if we don't have a reference to our collision shape, then let's just go ahead and grab it. So we'll just use the get node function, and we'll give it the name collision shape 2D. Okay, so if we don't yet have it, then it's going to grab it right here. Just trust me, if you don't have this line of code, you're going to get random errors when you're working in your project. So then all we have to really do, that's a lot of code just to set up our collision shape, but we're just going to say the collision shape.shape.size equals the new rect that we set up. Okay, so that's going to set the size of our rectangle, and then we'll go ahead and set the position as well. So we'll get the collision shape.position equals new position. Okay. Now, this update area is not being called anywhere yet. I'm going to go ahead and put it in I'm going to go ahead and call it in the ready function on the first line of the ready function, but we're going to do something else here. Let's go to our size variable. Where's size at? Right up here. Now, after size, after we declare that the value is 2, I'm going to put another colon, make a new line, and we're going to type in set. So if you haven't worked with the getter or setter in Godot, this is how you can do that. We're only going to do set here. So anytime a value is set on the size, right? Anytime value, in fact, I'm going to change that to _v so it's a little bit less confusing that what we're using this for. Then we're going to go like this. We're going to set our size to that new value _v. And then we're going to call our update area function. Okay, and this is going to happen, remember, since this is a tool script, this is going to happen in the editor as well. So let's go ahead and save that. I'm on scene 1 here, and let's just select one of these guys, and let's change the size. There we go. Now you'll notice something a little funky here. I'm changing one, and both of them are updating. Okay, and there's a reason for that. And let's go into our LevelTransition. That's because we've defined this shape in this scene, and it's shared amongst all the scenes. And in order to fix that, we need to go over here and open the shape settings here. And under resource, this is what we want to change. Local to scene. I'm going to turn that on and hit save. Okay, there we go. Now when I'm changing it, it's only changing the one area transition. Let's go to this guy and try it. Okay, that's working. This is said side left. You notice that it's got the little point right here, and you could use left or right, but actually this is going to become important later on when we decide where to spawn the player. So let's set the side to right. And that didn't change anything. Let's change the size. There we go. Remove that in here. The reason it didn't change when we changed the side is because we haven't set that up yet in our code. So let's go in here, and under side, we need to do a similar thing, right? We need to do this get set. So I'm going to put a colon after the side. I'm going to put set, and instead of size equals value, I'm going to say side equals value, and then we'll go ahead and just update the area. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that, go back to the level, and now if I select one of these transitions and change it to left or right or top or bottom, then it's updating appropriately. And you can see that this is 3 grid tiles tall, and this one is 2 wide, so I just set the size appropriately for both of those, and we're good to go. And then the last thing I want to do with this setting of these, position of these, is I want to do something with this snap to grid. You could turn on grid snapping in here, and you could just use that, and then you don't need to do what I'm going to do here, but I thought this was just kind of a fun exercise. So I'm going to open up my LevelTransition script. I made this snap to grid boolean, and this is kind of a weird hacky trick, but I did it because it saved me some sanity. And here's what we're going to do. Let's create a new function at the bottom of our script, and let's call it snap to grid. And then all we're going to do is we're going to just update our position to be a multiple of, you could choose whatever you want, 16 or 32 pixels. 32 would make sense. I'm going to put 16 just in case I have, you know, something that needs to be offset by half a tile or something like that. So I'm just going to say the position dot x equals, and then we're going to just get a round number. We're going to get the current position x divided by 16. So we're going to round that, right, to the nearest whole number, and then we'll multiply it back by 16. So that's just going to give us, oh, I put this as an equal arrow instead of a dash arrow. So that's just going to give us a rounded number for the x position. And I'm going to do the same thing for the y. And then let's go up here to our snap to grid Boolean, and let's do a set function for this as well. Okay, but instead of setting the value, I'm never going to update this Boolean. I'm just going to simply call the snap to grid function. Now, if we go back to our scene in 2D and let's pick this level transition, you'll notice it's a little bit off. If I click this Boolean, snapped. Didn't check it, just snapped it, updated the position. We'll do the same thing over here. Just snap it to the grid. There we go. So that's just a fun little trick. Take it or leave it, do what you want with it, and maybe you can think of some other ways to use something like that. Okay, so we've created some script and functionality so that we can place these level transitions. Let's go ahead and place them on our other scenes and set them up appropriately. Let's see, this is on the top, and size 2 is good. I'm just going to drag it up here, snap it to the grid. Good to go. Let's go to scene 3. We need to add a level transition. Okay, so let's just move this guy roughly where it needs to be. This is also needs to be 3. The size is 3. It's on the left. Snap it to the grid. Okay, so we've got our level transition set up in each of our little scenes. They're all called level transition, with the exception of one of them on this scene. One of them is called level transition 2, because obviously they can't have the same name if they're at the root level. That's okay. We'll handle that. The level transition 2, let's go ahead and set some of these variables up so that it's ready to work once we do our code. So I'm going to choose a level, and let's see, actually this should connect to level 3, right? Yeah, so let's go to scene 1, and this should connect. Let's go into our levels folder, area 1, and this should connect to scene 3, and it's going to connect to the level transition. And then this guy is going to connect to scene 2. Go ahead and save that. Let's go to scene 2, and this should connect back to scene 1. And actually, we could just copy that string, and let's go to our level 3 and just paste that in there. This one needs to connect to level transition 2, unlike the others, right? Go ahead and save these, because that one's connecting. Level 3 is connecting to this. Oh, wait, hold on. I got that backwards. So let's see, level 3, this is connecting to just regular level transition. We could just reset that. And our scene 2, this guy, this needs to connect to level transition 2. Okay, so we've got all that set up. We haven't done any code to handle our player entering the level transition, which is going to need to trigger the transition, right? So let's kind of take some baby steps and let's work on the level transition and the scene manager one bit at a time. Okay, we've got our level transition script. We want to set up a little bit more with this script. So right now, when we load this scene, we're updating the area. Now remember, we made this a tool script, right? And so it runs in the editor. And we actually don't want to run most of the new functionality that we add to this in the editor. So I'm going to go ahead and on the second line of my ready function, I'm just going to say if engine.isEditor hint. So if we're in the editor, then we're going to return, and we're not going to do anything else. So that's what this line of code does. It just checks engine.isEditor hint. We'll return true if we're in the editor and false if we're in the game. So, okay, so there we go. The first thing we want to do is we actually want to, this is going to seem counterintuitive at first, but we're going to set our monitoring to false. And that's because as we get into our script here, we don't want to be monitoring for the player until we know that the level's loaded and the player's in the proper place. Otherwise, the player could land on top of this area transition accidentally when we're transitioning between levels, or maybe even end up on a transition area on the opposite side of the scene or something weird like that, and just do weird things. So we're going to make sure that these are all set to false when they initialize. Later, we'll turn the monitoring back on. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and comment that out for just a moment because we'll come back to that, I think. We're going to, let's start with the most obvious thing that we need to do, and that's hook up the body entered signal. Since we are extending an area 2D, we have this body entered, so let's just connect that. And because we're monitoring the player layer, and we're not putting any other objects in our game on that layer, we can be pretty certain that it's going to be the player. So I'm just going to call this function that we call player entered. And let's just go ahead and define that right underneath our ready here. Now the body entered function has one argument, and that's the node. I'm just going to call it P since it's our player, but it's a node 2D. And we're going to do something here, right? And what we want to do here is tell the level manager, which we haven't built yet, that, hey, we want to like change levels. I'm having some issues today with my fingers, and I keep typing weird things. So instead of equal, here I typed equal and then an arrow instead of a dash and then an arrow. Second time I've done that in this video. Okay, so we're going to call level manager here. We'll come back to that. So maybe this is a good time actually to just go ahead and build the level manager, or not build the level manager, but add on to it. So if you remember in previous videos in this series, we've actually created a level manager. So let's go ahead and open that. This is what our level manager looks like. It's an autoload script. So if we look at our project and our project settings, it should be here in autoload, and it's the top item for me. And for you, it should also be kind of at the top. But it only has a really small bit of functionality currently, and that's just this signal and variable to track our tile map bounds that we use to update our camera. And this is going to come in handy as we change scenes, because we're going to need that. But we're going to need to add a whole lot more to this class. So I'm going to add a few more signals here. First of all, we're going to have a signal called level load started. And then a second signal, not single, but signal. And we'll just call this one level loaded. So once we get to a certain point in our loading a new level, we'll emit that signal. And then once we're finished, we'll emit this one. So there we go. There's our 3 signals that we'll have now in this class. We're going to want to store 2 additional variables. So we're going to want to store a reference to the target transition area. And if you recall, that's a string. And we're also going to want something which is going to help us position the player appropriately when he goes to a new level, and that's going to be the position offset. So even when we go to a new area, we want to know, like, was the player to the top, or was he on the top half or the bottom half, or, you know, we want to get his positioning correct so it's not jarring when you transition between levels. So that's a vector 2. So we're going to have 2 new signals and 2 new variables in our level manager. We're only going to need 1 additional function to make this work. So I'm going to make a new function. It's going to be called load new level. And this is the function that, like it says on the tin, it's going to load the level that we're moving to. And we're also going to use it to actually help get rid of the current level and things like that. It's not going to return anything. So there we go. Okay, now this load new level function is going to require a couple different arguments. So I'm actually going to hit return and hit tab again so that we're going to have multiple lines of arguments for this. It's easier to read it this way. So we're going to have a level path, which is a string, remember, and this is a reference to the scene that we're loading. We're going to have a target transition string, and then we're also going to have a position offset, which is a vector 2. So those are the 3 arguments we're going to need to pass into this loading a new level. And then here's what we're going to do. Let's start with pausing the game. So this is just kind of smart, just in case we need to. Now you could remove this, but for me, I think this is one of the better ways to handle it. So I'm going to just do get tree.paused equals true. Let's go ahead and store the target transition variable. So we've got a target transition. We'll just set it equal to the one we passed in, and we'll do the same with the position offset. And then we're going to have to add to this. We're going to emit our load. Let's see, level loaded, right? Or level load started. That's the one that we want to start with. Okay, so once we start that, we're going to emit this signal. I'm going to await here. So if you recall, what an await does is it just makes this function become asynchronous, and it's going to stop and wait for whatever we tell it to wait for. In this case, we're going to tell it to wait for the getTree.process frame, which is just going to wait for the next process tick. Now, the reason we're doing this is because in between the level load started and the next line of code, we want to make sure that the current level gets removed. That's why we're doing this here, and that'll make sense in just a second. So after we await, we're going to get the tree again, change scene to file, and we'll just use the level path that we passed in, and then we will unpause our game. We're going to do another await for a process frame. I should scroll down so I can see what I'm typing. And then we're going to emit our level loaded signal. Okay, so we've got a couple of waits in here, and we're actually going to add we're going to add a couple more. Let me just go ahead and copy this one, and you'll see why later why we're going to add these in. We're going to add a level transition at this point, like an effect, and then we're going to do the same right before we unpause it. Okay, so a couple more awaits in there, and we'll replace this code when we're ready to call that level transition. Okay, so this isn't going to do a whole lot just yet. It might actually kind of work. Let's see what happens when we run it. So I'm just going to hit F5. Oh, I don't want to hit F5. I'm going to just, well, you could use F6. I'm going to change my scene 1 in my project settings to my default scene in the run settings, so that I can hit F5 and I don't have to worry about this. Okay, so scene 1, there we go. Now if I hit F5, it's going to run that scene. So let's see what happens when I go down.
Nothing's happening.
And that's actually, I think, kind of obvious, because I'm pretty sure in here we didn't do anything when the player entered. Okay. So let's take some baby steps here, and let's do this one thing at a time, even if it causes some errors. So here, when the player enters, let's go to our LevelManager and call this new load new level function. And we're going to pass in the level. We've got the level. We've got the target transition area, and we're going to need an offset. But for now, let's just say it's 0, 0, 0. Let's see what happens when we do this. Oh, something happened. Got a little error. Let's check out the, oh, I don't see an error. Oh, well, something weird must have happened then. And I know one of the things weird that happened is we've got probably 2 levels, because our levels aren't hooked up appropriately yet. So let's go to our level script. And right now, all we do in our level script is this. What we need is let's create a function here called free level. Yeah, that's right. Almost. Oh my goodness, you guys. Okay. So in here, we're going to queue free this. Now, one thing we have to actually be very careful of is our player is a child of the level. So before we do that, we don't want our player to get destroyed or queue freed, right, with the level. So let's get our We've got our player manager, which is going to give us a nice way to reference our player. And actually, let's open this script up. So we made this unparent player script in a previous tutorial, and we didn't really use it much. So if you didn't follow that, you can recreate this functionality in your own way. And all we're doing is unparenting the player from whatever node we pass in. So if we look back at our level, let's just call that, let's say unparent player, and unparent it from ourselves, and then we queue free. And that way, again, the player won't be part of the level when it gets removed from the game. And now we need to connect to that signal. So let's get our level manager, and let's get level load started, and let's connect to that. And we'll just hook up our free level function. Okay, that's going to be one step closer to working. I don't know if this is going to work yet. It might kind of work. Oh, okay, kind of worked. There we go. We're on the level. We're not in the right position, are we? Okay, let's go ahead and fix that next. So let's look at our level transition. We need a way for our game to be able to pick up which level to load onto, or which level transition to load next to. So we're passing that in. Let's look at our level manager. That's the player manager. Here's the level manager. We are passing in a transition name as well as an offset. That's what we're going to use to do this. And you notice we're not doing anything with the code here. We're just going to store it in our level manager. Well, let's look at our level transition. What we want to do is we want to create a new function. I'll do it right here under player entered. And we'll call this function place player. And we don't need to pass anything in. And it's gonna be pretty simple actually. So we're gonna first check if this is the right transition area that a player wants to spawn next to or appear next to. So if it does not equal, let's look at the level manager and the target transition. So if the name of this level transition does not equal the name of the one stored in our level manager, then we're not the guy who's looking for. Otherwise, if it is, then we're going to want to get the position. Let's look at our player manager. We have a set player position function. Let's use that. So, okay, let's go back to level transition. So let's call the set, it was set player position. Well, I accidentally didn't hit enter. Okay. And in this case, we want to set it to the global position of this transition area, plus we need that position offset. So let's go to the level manager. We stored that here. Okay. So that's just going to set that. Now, we are not currently storing this position offset. So you can see when the player enters, we're setting it to 0, and that's not what we want. Let's go ahead and let's just update this. Instead of passing in our vector 2.0, we want to actually get the offset. So I'm going to make a new function called get offset, and it'll return a, not return, I don't need to type that. It'll return vector 2. We're going to declare this variable here. We'll set it offset to 0 by default. And then we're going to return the offset at the end of the function. Let's also get the player position. So we can get that from our player manager, and then grab our player and get his global position. Now we need to detect if this is going to be different based on if we're on the left, right, top, or bottom. So there's different ways to calculate this. So if the side is side left, or if it's side right, then we're going to do the following block of code. We're going to set the offset X equal to the player position. Hold on. We want to do the Y, I think. We're going to calculate the Y here, left or right. So this is going to equal, or Y is not left or right, it's up or down. We're going to take the player position Y minus this guy is global position dot y. So that's going to get the, the difference up or down where the player is. And then on the x-axis, it's going to be set. It's just going to equal 16 pixels. So he'll just be outside of the transition area when he enters. And then if this is the right side, no, if it's the left side, if it's the right side, we're good. But if it's the left side, then we're going to multiply the offset x by -1 times equals -1. Okay, so that it appears on the left instead of on the right. So if it's not left or right, then we know it's top or bottom. So we'll go similar code here. Actually, let's go ahead and copy and paste this. Except we've got to change some things. So now here we're doing the x position instead of the y. The offset y is going to be a fixed number. And then if it's, here we'll just check if it's top. Then multiply the y by -1. Okay, so there we go. So now we're calculating our offset and we're returning it. So when we do this, let's see, where is it out? When the player enters here, instead of passing vector2 0, we'll just call our get offset function. Currently, actually, I don't think we're, let's see, we're not calling the place player, are we? Let's look here. Nope, we're not. So place player is not happening. What we want to do here is we actually want to just call place player in our ready function. It's going to try and place the player. And this is where we want to set monitoring to false, right? So that if the player gets placed on top of another transition area, he doesn't immediately trigger that new one. And then before we connect the player entered, let's just await our level to be finished loading, which we did set that up. So we can go LevelManager, and then let's see, level loaded. Okay, so our ready script is going to go this far and then wait until the level loaded signal gets emitted. And then we can turn monitoring back on. And then we connect our player entered. And we should be good to go. Okay, let's try this one more time, yet again. Oh no, nothing happened. I know why. One little trick, because we're disabling this, the very first time a level loads, we're not going to get a level loaded signal, are we? Because we never called that. So this first level is never going to reactivate. It's just still waiting for a level loaded signal. And we can actually fix that pretty easily. Let's go to our LevelManager. And in our ready function, wait, that's player manager. Let me close player manager. We don't need that anymore. Okay, so LevelManager. We don't currently have a ready function. So let's add one. Put that at the top. What we're going to do is we're just going to do an await. And we'll do get tree. And just process frame. That's going to get us to the first process frame. That means all of our scenes in our game are loaded, which means our level transitions in our first level will be loaded. At that point, we'll just emit this level loaded signal. There we go, because we know that the first level has to load, right? Okay, so let's try yet again. Boom. Okay. Oh, I've got some transitions screwed up here, but it's kind of working. When we go down, it came to the right spot. Let's try this again off the left side. Yeah, see how he keeps on the same side. Let's go ahead and look at why that might be happening. Let's look at, I might have mixed this up earlier when I was setting these up. So this level transition is loading area scene 1, level transition 2. Let's look at scene 1. Oh, yeah, see, I told it the wrong one. So this should be, I did mix this up. So this is supposed to go to just level transition. Let's say that. So originally when I did this earlier, I had it correct the first time. So this guy should be going to level transition 2. Let's run it. one more time. See if this works. There we go. Boom. Nice. So if we wanted to, you'll notice, see how the player keeps his position in relation to where he enters and exits into the next level. So we did a bit of extra work to make that happen. And now you could stop here if you wanted to. You'll notice, especially if you have a simple game, this transition is fast enough that it's pretty good as is. There is a bit of a flash, like a flashes black momentarily. And so what we're going to do to wrap this up for those who want to continue to follow along is add like a transition animation. And that's going to just kind of smooth this out a little bit. But there you go. We've got a basic scene manager, and it's keeping our player, you know, in the right spot and allowing us to move between scenes. And I've got an error with my plants. I wonder if this is an error that I had previously. Oh, yeah. Let's fix this real quick. If you were following along in a previous video, I think some of you actually saw this. I did not fix this. So we changed how our hitbox and hurtboxes work. Let's just go to our plant and update that real quick. So props, plants, plant script, take damage, int. This is actually looking for, I think, a hurtbox, if I recall. We're not actually consuming any of the values from that, so I think I can just change that and it should be good to go. Let's see what happens here. There we go. Okay, so that's fixed. Oops, I don't know what I clicked on. So yeah, so if you want to stop here, I'm glad we got that little bug fixed before some of you hopefully logged off. But you've got some basic things set up that you can use here, and then we'll add the transitions as well. Okay, so in order to do this scene transition that I mentioned, let's go in our GUI folder. I'm going to create a new folder and call it scene transition. So we're going to add all of our transitions to this new scene that we're going to create here. So I'm going to create a new scene, just call it scene transition. I'm pretty creative with my names. It's kind of weird that they're repetitive maybe, but to me it's just how I like to keep things organized. We're going to need a script here too, so let's go ahead and create the script. And I'm going to put the script on the scene transition. Now this scene transition, we want this to be a canvas layer, like our player UI. So let's see, change type, canvas layer. I'm going to do something here. You'll notice on our layer, we've got it on layer 1, and we don't want this to overlap and cover up our player UI. I would like that to stay on top, actually. You can do it whichever way you want. So I'm going to open up my player HUD and expand the layer. I'm going to just set this to layer 2, save that, and close it. Okay, that's all I'm going to do there. Let's add a child node to our scene. It's just going to be of type control. And I'm going to just come in here and just under the anchor presets, select this full screen preset. And I'm going to add a color rectangle. And I'm going to do the same thing. Boom. And I'm going to set this to black. We're going to make a very simple scene transition. So you can take this and like really run with it if you want to and do, you know, whatever you want to. And it's going to play pretty nicely with our, how we've set up our scene transition. So I'm going to add an animation player. And let's just create a couple quick animations. Let's make a default animation actually. So this is just what it'll be on when we start. I'm going to put it on autoplay. And while we have this animation selected, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to grab our color. I'm going to set the alpha all the way to 0 and hit the keyframe to create a keyframe for that. Okay, there we go. Now let's go, and we don't want this to repeat or anything. So now I'm going to take this animation, I'm going to duplicate it, I'm going to call it fade in. So this is the black fading in, I guess. I don't know, you could rename this if it makes more sense to you a different way. Actually, let's go ahead and do that. Let's call this, let's fade in will be the level fading in. So I'm going to go ahead and just take this keyframe and I'm going to put it, I don't want this animation to be very long, maybe 0.2 seconds. Okay. And then let's just insert a key right here at the beginning, and we'll change this one to have full alpha 255. Okay, so our fade in is going to do that. And then let's duplicate this animation and we'll call it fade out. I think this makes more sense. So the level's fading out, not the transition. We'll just swap these keyframes. Okay, there we go. 2 animations, very simple. Let's open our script editor for this scene transition. And I'm going to delete this stuff. I'm going to make this extend to canvas layer. That's not going to be too important at this point. I'm not even going to give this one a class name. We just want to get a reference to our animation player. And then we're going to add 2 functions. And it will be fade out and fade in. And these are actually going to return a Boolean. And you'll see why in just a moment. So that's going to return a Boolean. And what we'll do in fade out is we'll get our animation player and we're going to play the fade out animation, right? And then we're going to wait for that animation to finish. Animation finished. And then we're going to return true. So this function has now become asynchronous. It's going to wait and then it's going to eventually return true when it's done. And let's just copy and paste this because our fade in animation is going to be almost identical, except it's going to be called fade in and it's going to play fade in. And likewise, we're going to, when we call this function, it's going to be asynchronous. So we can call it and wait for the result to come through that it's finished. Now, if we, let's make this scene transition an autoload scene. So let's go to project settings, autoload. Let's go in here. It's under GUI, scene transition. Grab the scene. Call it scene transition. That's good. We'll just add it. Okay, so there we go. It's fine at the bottom like that. So now this scene transition scene is loading when we run the project. And then let's open our level manager. So you recall in here, if we have in our load new level, we added a couple things where I commented that we're going to wait for a level transition. So let's change, instead of waiting for a process frame, let's do, we don't want to do get tree. What we're going to do, instead of getting the tree and doing that, we're going to await our scene transition scene dot fade out. Okay. And then here where we're awaiting again, before we unpause it, we're going to await scene transition fade in. Is it really that simple? Let's see if it works. Nope, it's not that simple. I'm not sure what happened. Okay, let's just take a look real quick and see why that didn't work. Because we're pausing our game. Yeah. So actually our scene transition, it's not playing, and we can fix that. We can just go down here and select the scene transition, that root node, and go under to process. And for mode, when we pause the game, this is inheriting the mode, right? So it's becoming paused. We can just turn this on to always. And that means that this is always going to function. That should fix this issue that we're having right there. So now if we try this, there we go. Does a little quick fade out, fade in. And this is where that pausing the player actually becomes a little bit more handy, because if your transition is 5 seconds, it doesn't matter how long it is, we're going to pause before and unpause after. So that way you won't, like, if there was an enemy chasing you out of the level and you got here and it took 2 seconds to change, your player wouldn't just get damaged while you're unable to do anything. So there we go. We've created a pretty basic but nice scene manager. At least I hope you think it's nice. It allows us to have this nice transition between scenes. I think it's fairly easy to reuse, so that you can just start adding levels onto your game, and all you need to do is add a scene transition, point it to the new scene. So thanks for following along. I appreciate it if you have likes or comments. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more. And as always, we'll see you next time.